panelists, our first panelists on the screen right now. Everyone wave hi, they're all muted. We're going to turn it over to you guys. Liz and I are going to back out and disappear, but we encourage you guys to ask questions out there. We have a Q&A function on Zoom. You can use that to ask your questions. You can also go on Facebook or Twitter or all that social media and shoot away. We're going to try to get as many questions as possible for our panelists. So fire away, and when we have some time during our first panel, we'll hit you guys up.
Okay, so I'd like to introduce our first panel, Words to Live By, How Literature Can Sustain Us During a Crisis. We thought that was a timely topic that people would really welcome. I'd like to welcome Dr. Alison Steier, a licensed clinical psychologist at Southwest Human Development in Phoenix, Arizona. So she's coming to us from much earlier in the morning. We thank you, Dr. Steier. She is Vice President of Mental Health Services and Director of Arizona's System of Early Childhood Mental Health Consultation. Dr. Steier earned her doctoral degree from George Mason University. She is the founder and co-chair of the RAIN Group, a think tank comprised of national experts, which works to advance practice, policy, and research in mental health consultation. She will be joined in conversation today by Louis Bayard, author of the historical romance, Courting Mr. Lincoln. Lou is also an instructor at George Washington University, a board member of the Penn Faulkner Foundation, and the author of the very popular Downton Abbey recaps for the New York Times. Thanks for joining us, Lou. We also welcome Abby Maslin. She's a teacher at a Capitol Hill elementary school and author of the memoir, Love You Hard, about her husband's recovery from a brutal attack and traumatic brain injury. We're welcoming Christopher Datta. I hope I have pronounced Mr. Datta's name correctly. He will correct me if I have not. He's a former diplomat and author of both fiction and nonfiction books. His most recent title is Guardians of the Grail. And we welcome Ethelbert Miller, the Dean of DC Poets, an editor, educator, radio personality, and member of the Washington, DC Hall of Fame. And they're off.
All right. Thank you, Liz, for that introduction and for introducing all of our panelists. I have a little familiarity with crisis, a recent familiarity, which is that I came into my office at the crack of dawn to use state-of-the-art equipment, which then proceeded not to work. So I'm reminded of all of the symptoms of all the physiological symptoms of anxiety and so on. But I first want to say I'm so impressed, and I just so admire the event, this contribution to the Capitol Hill community, particularly in this time where people really need to come together and do something that helps them feel uplifted. I think everything that Mr. Rogers ever said about neighborhoods is true. And I remember from my own time in DC how special the Capitol Hill neighborhood is. So good for you all, and I'm glad to be able to get a feel for that even from a distance. I think what I want to do is start first by just saying a few words about crisis and the impact that it has on people, which is really quite quite across all areas of our life. People will have alterations in their mood. They'll feel either more irritable or angry or sad and tearful. Appetite can be affected, go way up or way down. Sleep can be affected, where people have nightmares, or trouble getting to sleep, trouble staying asleep, or maybe sleeping too much. And even memory and attention can be affected. I remember after Hurricane Katrina, and I would talk to colleagues in New Orleans, and invariably people would stop mid-sentence and say, did I tell you that already? It was hard to track. Anxiety again is increased, and also fears, which can sometimes look, sometimes people will show fear in a way that brings people close to them for comfort, but other times it can look quite aggressive, which I actually think we're seeing in the country. And crisis can also disrupt, make people question their faith and their core beliefs about themselves, about relationships, about the world. So the question then is, how do we get through? And that is the conversation that we're going to have today, where we have this great good fortune of writers talking about the special value of literature in a time of crisis. So I wonder if, Abby, would you be able to kick us off with your thoughts about literature in crisis?
Sure. I mean, I want to start by saying literature is what has saved me during my personal times of crisis. And, my memoir is about living through crisis, and it's about making peace with uncertainty and looking forward even when your sense of safety has been threatened. So I don't know if anybody else was experiencing this kind of at the beginning of our coronavirus pandemic here, but I was having a really hard time reading at first. I just didn't have the attention that it required to read, which reminded me of other periods of my life in which I was also in crisis and my attention was really limited. And then what happened is my mind began to adjust to this idea that we were going to be home for a while and that this experience was going to look so different for every individual. Some of us are experiencing this in really joyful ways. Others are experiencing this in really threatening ways. I began reading a lot, especially over the past month. It's just a reminder that stories connect us. I think we were, as Americans, we were hungry for connection before, but this quarantine has made us honest about that hunger. And so I always go to literature to hear not about experiences that are the same as mine, but to hear about universal emotional experiences. How people question their core beliefs and what, as you mentioned a few moments ago, and what that process of transformation is like for people, because I find it really affirming, especially in moments like this, to know that others have survived their own hells, their own moments of uncertainty, and come to a new understanding of themselves and the world and what matters.
Yes, thank you. Lou, can you, do you have some insights to share?
Just to second everything start by seconding everything that Abby said. I initially had some problems myself, but now I'm trying to look at the upside of having all this at home time and having books more available than ever before. You can see all the crap stacked on my shelves behind me. My to read pile is higher than ever, and I've always said that one of the things that keeps me alive is just there's always gonna be some other book to read, and there always is. But to me, the values of literature are still what they always were, but just amplified by the current crisis. And that's the values in my mind are to console, but also to challenge and make us question and make us look at things in a new light. So if anything, those values are more important for us to appreciate and take advantage of than ever.
Yes, and you're both talking about how people shift in a crisis from an initial period of adjustment to another state and then another after that. Chris, can you chime in here? What are your thoughts about the value of literature in a time like this?
Yeah, sure. My book, Guardians of the Grail, A Life of Diplomacy on the Edge, is my memoir about my career as a Foreign Service officer. And I was in Rwanda after the genocide. I was in South Sudan when it was at war with Sudan. I was in Liberia when it was the capital was surrounded by rebels and it was under fire, and Sierra Leone at the end of the civil war there. And I think that reading about so many people today don't understand what I'm trying to say is that our institutions that we depend on, that are so important to our country, are under constant assault. And I think what the book does is it talks about how important government workers are and all the sacrifices that we make in the course of our careers and what good we're able to do in the course of our careers. And I think it's inspiring to know that that's what's happening in government and in other places. I've the health workers today that are doing so much to try and save lives. These are government workers or working in hospitals. And these are inspiring people. And I think that books like mine and books like Abby's are very important to this time to read about the things that people do to get through times like this.
Thank you. That's well said. And a window into, you know, a world that maybe people didn't know about, which can be very absorbing in a time when we're otherwise maybe preoccupied with lots of fear in our own personal lives. Ethelbert?
Yes.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I feel as a poet, as a writer of the heart, there's always a crisis. Earlier this year, my writing took me to our southern border, and I was a member of a small delegation organized by WOLA, the Washington Office on Latin America. And we went down to El Paso and to Mexico to examine the condition of migrants coming from Guatemala and Honduras and El Salvador. And you might recall that was a major crisis before the coronavirus. And it was very important, you know, to respond to that. And I responded to that in terms of, my father was an immigrant from Panama. So I was very much aware of, you know, people being detained. But then I also realized that you just couldn't go down there and be an observer. You know, you had to really be what James Baldwin called, be a witness. That if you see something that you have to give testimony, you have to testify, you have to speak the truth. And as writers, that becomes extremely important because sadly as it is, we are now living through an era of lies. And as writers, you know, we have to sort of reclaim the language through our own personal stories and narratives, but then also speak to what, I guess, in the tradition of Whitman, we must embrace the entire country, especially during a time of division in terms of what Whitman saw here in Washington, in terms of our nation being divided. And so as writers, what we hope is that we seek and find the common language between all of us and realize that, you know, that this is a global problem. You know, there's a global crisis. And as writers, we just don't have to speak for people saying simply in Rwanda. We have to speak for the mountains and the trees. And I sort of echo the poet Ernesto Cardenal in his poetry ecology. It's yes, we have responsibility to speak for those who cannot speak, not necessarily people, but also plants and trees and rivers.
That's beautiful.
I just wanted to add on to Ethelbert. I've found poetry a particular consolation during this time. There's something about the compression of the language that seems to deliver a correspondingly more powerful benefit. So I'm
glad you said that, because over the last few weeks, what I have written is probably about 22 haiku. So when you deal with that compression, that's what I've been doing in terms of form and genre.
You know, that's so funny. Same here. I've read more poetry in the past month than I have in years. I think part of it also is during times of crisis, there is this heightened sensory experience that happens. You go outside and that tree that's been in your front yard for 10 years, finally you're seeing it and you're really seeing it. And you can stay with something in a way that you might not have been able to do before. And so, yeah, I think of all genres, poetry is going to carry us through this in a really, really special way.
If I could mention one poem that people might want to go and read, it would be the poem Keeping Quiet by Pablo Neruda. And it might be a poem the same way we remember during 9/11, people were reciting Auden. But there are poems that provide that sort of comfort or balm at these times of crisis.
I find music has been a big pull for me in this time. And that's poetry and, of course, music combined. And that's been very important to me.
You know, when you say that, and I guess this is Abby, everyone who's here, we've all lost people, and one person who I guess I was affected by was the musician Ellis Marsalis, because a few weeks before I was having breakfast with Ellis Marsalis III, and his phone rang. And he said, "Oh, it's my dad." And I said, "Oh, no, look, you just recently lost your mother. That's your dad on the phone. Take that call. I'll go to the restroom." And then, what happens, here it is that a few weeks later, his father's gone. And I'm almost certain all of you have had someone that This isn't abstract. This isn't like, reading the obituary column. These are people that you know.
Yes. Yeah. What's interesting.
I played guitar when in my late teens and early 20s, and then I lost it. And I've taken it up again now. I'm having to relearn how to chord, but I'm really enjoying it.
It makes me think so much of the grieving process and how people are being cheated in so many ways, of being able to to sit in that moment and have recognition for the loss. Literature holds that space. Literature is the place to sit with grief and unpack it. And so I think one of the hardest things to read about right now in the news are people losing family members and not being able to be there for their final moments and not being able to commemorate their lives in special ways. That's why I also think reading is such a hugely important part of how we make sense of what's happening right now as people struggle to just have their own grief process honored.
Well, it's interesting too to think about art that doesn't, so poetry and music both bypass the frontal lobes of the brain, the higher order, the intellectualized part of the brain, and affect us in a much richer or deeper and different level. It gives us a chance to really feel our feelings and resonate with other people. Are there ways in which you think your particular styles of writing really speak to a moment like the one that we all are sharing globally?
I don't know about if it's just our writing. I think it's what we do as writers. I'm a literary activist, and my work, takes me into senior citizen homes, takes me into prisons, and when I look at this crisis, what's happening in our nursing homes is criminal. What's happening in our shelters, what's happening in our prisons. And so once again, as writers, we have to make sure that we're not deaf or blind to those cries.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
what about
as a narrative and nonfiction writer, I mean, this is what we do, is to process what's happening in our own lives. And, I think one of the beautiful parts of memoir is that the author has had the opportunity to sit with the experience for some time. It takes a really long time for books to get written and made. And so during that process, that individual has had an opportunity to really mine that experience for all the wisdom and all the lessons from it. And so when you're sitting squarely in the middle of your own cycle of transformation and you're not yet at the place where there is a lesson or a change that's observable, it's really, really assuring to be able to go into other people's stories and have somebody who's done that mental work already and be able to share their outcomes.
Yes. I am seeing that we actually have a question from the audience, which might be a good time to take that. And Tim, can you tell us that question?
Absolutely, absolutely. There's a question from Peter that asks, what about friends, organizations, neighbors, relatives, and helping us to cope and connect?
Well, maybe I'll address it in a different way. One of the things, a lot of this took place before, gentrification was taking place. What I always found interesting is that, somebody would move in the city and build what we call a privacy wall, and I sort of find that interesting because, we have a president who wants to build a wall. And what I'm looking at is that, my neighbor, I'm speaking to him over a wall, and I think prior to that, that would not have been the case. It'll be interesting to see how our city transforms itself in terms of neighborhoods once the weather gets warmer and people are out. We know that people have been like singing across the street and things of that sort. But my concern as a writer is what I consider to be a loss of intimacy, between people.
And yet it's funny because one of the things that has been borne home to me is that my life as a writer is not too much different now than it was before. There was still a lot of alone time. In fact, some friends have joked with me that this process has has involved very little transition for me. And if anything, I have more people around me now than I used to. I have 3 other people in the house. So it's interesting because there's, you know, we're used to doing the solitary work. We're used to being alone, but there's still this feeling of loss. And I think it is that loss of connection that the questioner was talking about, this feeling of just being able to knock on somebody's door, or go out and have drinks, or have a dinner, or go to church. You know, there's so many ways we've lost this connection, but it's amazing to me how much Zoom, it shows how much we need the connection one way or another. And all these things that we're doing, like this festival, shows we need it in a profound way.
Yes, we're social. It's a shame that it's called social distancing, because it's really about physical distancing, and we actually need very much to stay socially connected.
Well, I've gotten a lot closer to my wife, and I've got 2 dogs and 4 cats to keep me company. So that's been having the animals around has been a real blessing.
How's that working out for her?
Well, I buried her gun in the backyard, so you know.
that seems wise.
Just joking.
It's hard to imagine living anywhere other than Capitol Hill in this moment, because there are still so many opportunities to see humans and feel connected to humans. I think often about what this would feel like in a more rural area, and I think it's got to be a very different experience. We were well prepared for this moment in our neighborhood because we are so closely knit and we are so dedicated to knowing our neighbors.
Well, I'll tell you what's happening in the other part of the city, because I'm close to Rock Creek Park, and the animals are reclaiming the city. You know, yes, the squirrels are more aggressive. I've seen birds that I haven't, you know, woodpeckers are out here now, you know. So, you know, it's interesting in terms of, you know, the neighborhoods and how it's changing and affecting people.
Yeah. Are there writers or works that you all turn to in deeply troubled times?
Well, you know, when Louis was talking about compression, you know, I turned to Richard Wright's book of haiku, which I had, and it was just sitting there. And I have a tendency of sticking letters into books and stuff. And when I pulled out the book, there was a letter from the publisher saying that Ellen Wright wants you to get this book, which was Richard Wright's widow. And so, you know, I felt, well, I better start writing my haiku to keep the tradition alive. But that was a writer I looked to for information.
Getting back to the poets, Mary Oliver is really wonderful to read at this kind of time. Billy Collins, Emily Dickinson. There's this wonderful trove of thought and verse out there, and it can be done so, you know, it doesn't take a lot of time to read a single poem, so it's kind of wonderful that way. Not that TV isn't great too.
Abby, are you reading anything in particular, or do you turn in a time of crisis to somebody that you like to read?
Yeah, I mean, I love the words of Anne Lamott. I love everything she's written. I think she's so brilliant at taking the ordinary and elevating it to spiritual for us, and just in a very comforting way. There's a memoir I read last year that I have not stopped talking about for a year, and it's called The Choice by Dr. Edith Eger, and it's a Holocaust survival memoir. It completely changed my life. It is the book that I will probably read 85 times because it is such a powerful reminder of how we are still in control of our responses, even in the worst moments of our lives. We are still such, we're still such agents of change within ourselves. And so I would recommend that to anybody who hasn't already read it.
Right.
I spend a lot of time reading histories and biographies because 2 of my books are novels that take place in the American Civil War. And for instance, Grant's autobiography or Sherman's autobiography, they're amazingly good writers. You never might have suspected that Grant was that good a writer, but that was the greatest crisis this country has ever faced, with over 650,000 dead over the course of the war. And I find these memoirs and these biographies really inspiring.
Mm-hmm. Must be nice to also read about good leadership.
Yes.
Point taken, Alison. Point taken.
Yeah. Oops. So I'm mindful of the time, and we knew that this was going to fly by like that. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today under these suboptimal circumstances, but still such a lovely conversation. My own feeling is that a crisis is, it's like being in a snow globe where everything gets shaken up, and you can't see a darn thing. But when the flurry settles, there's opportunity for it to settle in a different way and in a better way. And so I think that is sort of a note of hopefulness for us, and a little bit of a prayer for us that the snow will settle in a better way than it has been. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And take good care, be safe and healthy.
You as well.
Thank you, Alison.
Okay, thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, thank you. Thank you to Allison and all those panelists. I noticed we got several more questions in. So if those panelists want to take a moment or two and type the answers, there is a function on the Zoom to address some of the questions kind of on the offline set to respond to some of those folks. They can go right on the Zoom functions up at top, at least on my screen, in the Q&A, and they can tackle that. So, Liz?
Well, I could just listen to this panel all day. I feel so much better after listening to all of them. I know we need to move on, but that was wonderful. Tim, I think the secret's out now about the authors on Capitol Hill. I don't know if Capitol Hill is ever going to be the same. The world knows now. I don't know. Good news. My mom gave up Cuomo.
Oh, we need Cuomo.
Mom is watching. She gave up Cuomo. So I'm wondering, I don't know, does that mean that the Literary Hill BookFest should run in the next election? I don't know. I don't know if that's allowed. Okay, I think, Tim, I think you have a little treat for us. Do we have a video?
Yes, we're going to take a little break as we set up for our next panel here. We're going to switch over to one of our great videos that our authors, in this case, one of our poets, has submitted. And I'm not going to tell you too much about it. I'm going to let her words speak for us. But this is one of our poets. Lee Woodman is going to share some of her words. So without further ado, we're going to cut right to that.
Hello, and welcome to the Literary Hill BookFest. I'm Lee Woodman, and I'm appearing here online rather than at Eastern Market, where we had all hoped to be on May 3rd. I'm a poet, and I have a new book that will be published by Finishing Line Press on May 22nd. And it is about growing up overseas and coming back to live in the States at age 14. I'm going to read a little bit of the synopsis for you and one poem called Home Leave. So the synopsis, I take the reader from an Indian village to the edge of Tibet to a small town in New Hampshire. I've never really stopped searching for what it means to be American, digging deep to understand my New England roots, or my parents' New England roots, that is, and asking where and what is home. I think of myself as a global citizen. I think we all need to in this day of coronavirus and very troubled political times. So I'm going to read you from the India section of the book, a poem called Home Leave. Every 2 years, my family would come to the States to visit grandparents and cousins for 3 months. Home leave. What should I answer? How to explain? Do you really go to school in New Delhi? We were curious strangers, both home and away. 3 months of questions, some hard to convey. Do you speak Hindi? Do you wear saris? What should I answer? How to explain? Do you ride elephants? Been to Bombay? Do you eat curry? What is a lychee? We were curious strangers, both home and away. What are you doing in the USA? Do you like TV? Know how to ski? What should I answer? How to explain? We're visiting family. Dad's on holiday. We love Grandma's ice cream. We're glued to TV. We were curious strangers, both home and away. On return to New Delhi, my friends will all say, "Well, where were you during the lights of Diwali?" How should I answer? How to explain? We were curious strangers, both home and away. Two last things. I encourage you to go to Finishing Line Press and look for my book called Homescapes. And also, I invite you to come and visit my website. It's www.poetleewoodman.com. Thank you so much to Karen Lyon and all the volunteers who have made this online festival possible. Thanks.
Thank you. That was a beautiful poem. Thank you to Lee Woodman. Next up, we have our virtual Children's Corner. But first, I need to give a shout out to a couple of our exhibitors. I want to give a shout out to Reach Incorporated and Shout Mouse Press, who partner each year to create children's picture books. You visit our website, you'll find a link to Reach's YouTube channel and at least 8 readings of Shout Mouse Press books read by the teenage authors who wrote them. I can't think of anything cooler than that. I also want to give a shout out to Platypus Media and Science Naturally. They're independent publishers of family and children's books. They've created a beautiful landing page that you will find on our website of all kinds of literary treats for kids. Our moderator for our Children's Corner is Laura Nakatani. She's a board member with the Literary Hill BookFest, and she works at the Capitol Hill Day School.
Hello, readers. Welcome to the Children's Corner. We have some fabulous children's authors for you to listen to today. We have Rashin Kheiriyeh, Allison McGill, Eva Pell, and Katy Kelly. And I wanted to thank you because you're helping our community stay healthy by staying at home. And I know it can be a hard job. There's a person who does research on how to be strong and resilient and handle challenges. And her name is Sania Luthar, and she works for the, Authentic Connections. And what she says is that one of the important things to build resilience is to have opportunities for altruism, which is helping other people and taking care of other people. And I think that's a theme of our authors' stories today, that you'll hear in their readings, different ways that the characters help other people or other animals. So especially in the face of challenges. We're gonna start with Rashin Kheiriyeh. She's an internationally recognized author who lives on Capitol Hill, and she's published over 80 children's books. Her latest one is a collaboration with the writer Kyo McLear. So I'm going to turn it over to her, Rashin.
Everyone, thank you so much for inviting me and for that beautiful introduction. As you mentioned, my recent book is written by Kyo McLear. That was a wonderful project we did together. Book published by Tundra Books in Penguin Random House in Canada. And it's about little kids and families with the rest of the refugee groups searching for a safe place, a home. So the book called Storybook. So I'm gonna read this book. Here we are. What's that? Well, here is just here. Or here. Here is a cup, old and fine, warm as a hug. Every morning, as things keep changing, we sit wherever we are, and sip, sip, sip. Sippy, sip, sip. From this cup. And this cup is a home. Here is a blanket, patterned and soft, color of apricots. Every night when the world feels not quite cozy and everyone seems weary from hoping and hurrying, we snuggle and dream under this blanket. And this blanket is a sail. Here isn't always the same. Sometimes it's here just for a moment. Here is a lamp, big and bright, powered by the sun. Every evening, as the sky grows dark, we write and read and wonder, what will we be by the light of this lamp? And this lamp is a lighthouse. Here is a sign that everyone can sing, and here is the moon and a million sparkling stars. Here is a flower, bold and sweet, wild and welcoming. Every day when the weather is nice or gray and stormy, we wonder, where will we be? Who will we meet as we sit in the field with these flowers? And this flower is a ladder. Here is our journey that holds the warmth of a cup, the softness of a blanket, the brightness of a lamp, the strength of a flower, and the openness of a story. Every week we dream and draw, make and play, search for treasure, find our way and grow and wait and wait and wait, adding words to this story. And this story is a boat. Here we are. Here. The end.
Thank you so much, Rashin. If you have a chance, please go out and purchase this book from Tundra Books, because seeing those illustrations up close is just a wholly different experience than seeing them on screen. Next, we have Allison McGill, who is an author and a founder of Lola and Pear Publishing. For parents navigating the stay-at-home order, her book, Mommy Didn't Say That, may be a helpful resource during this time to help you reframe some of the phrases your children might be overhearing as you deal with your stress in this crisis. She has a video excerpt for that on our website, Literary Hill BookFest. And she's going to be reading today from a book that's actually based on a real live story about a dog.
This is The Adventures of Duke, the therapy dog. Duke finds a home. This is for Jack, who misses his puppy. My name is Duke. Before I found my forever home, I was a nameless puppy who wasn't treated very well. I would lie down in the dirt, hungry and thirsty, wondering if I would ever find a home with a family that would take care of me. and that I could take care of. One day, people from a wonderful rescue group saved me. They gave me food and water, which tasted extra good because I was so hungry and thirsty. My foster parents nursed me back to health and named me Duke. I was ready to be adopted. Duke. A couple, Joe and Allie, wanted to adopt a rescue dog, and they wanted to meet me. You see Duke on the computer screen? Allie paced back and forth and back and forth and back and forth some more as she waited for me and my foster parents to come to their home. She was excited to meet me. Make sure you get good view of the pictures. Knock, knock. Within seconds, everyone knew I had found my forever home. Aww. Make sure you see that. I went from not being treated well to sleeping in the bed with them and snuggling on the couch with them while they watched television. When I'm really relaxed and feeling safe and secure, I'll show you these pictures. I fall asleep with my tongue hanging out of my mouth. You see that? My new family takes me for long walks. They always make sure I have enough water, food and water, and lots of treats. And toys to play with or snuggle. I even have gifts and a stocking on Christmas morning. I love my forever family and they love me. I can't believe how much my life has changed thanks to the rescue, my foster parents, and my forever home. I am glad I was rescued and adopted. I now have a home with people to take care of me, and I can take care of them. Exactly what I had hoped for. To be continued. The end. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you, Allison. We have Eva Pell is our next author. She's a biologist and an author. She is writing a series of the ResQ group, which is led by two cousins who go and help endangered animals. Be sure to watch her video reading from the first book in her series, ResQ and the Baby Orangutan, and that's on the Literary Hill BookFest website. And we are lucky to have a preview of her second book that is going to be released June 15th. So be sure to get online and get a pre-order of this book. Thank you, Eva.
Thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in for me to read about ResQ Takes on the Talkie. I'm so happy to be with all of you today and thank you for the opportunity. So ResQ Takes on the Talkie, this is the book. And Talkie is a word, a Mongolian word for spirit. And it's about, it's also the name of an endangered species. It's a horse that went extinct in the wild in the 1960s. And because of the hard work of conservation biologists around the country, it began to be reintroduced in about 2000. So this story is about a harem, which is a family of Talkie, a stallion, some mares, and a foal that have been reintroduced, but they have been lost and scientists can't find them. They've clearly wandered away from the national park in Mongolia. And the rescue squad the rescue team has been invited to come to Mongolia to find them. The passage I'm going to read to you starts with two members, Wheaton, who's our narrator. He's an 11-year-old brainiac inventor. His cousin Stowe, who's a biologist naturalist. and a new friend of theirs, a 17-year-old girl named Sarnai, who's a member of a nomadic tribe. The three of them have gone off to try and find this harem of Taki. Unfortunately, a big wind has blown up and it has just taken their tent and blown it up into the sky. So I'm going to read to you about a 5-minute passage in the middle of the book called Seeking Shelter. The tent flies off like a parachute in reverse, and Stowe screams, "I thought you said the weather was going to be good for the next 36 hours. It was, I yell back, not like I can control some random cloud. And who staked down the tent, Missy? This isn't all my fault. Stowe glares at me, pulls up her hood, yanks on her gloves, and without saying another word, races off chasing the tent. I pause for a second and then take off in pursuit. The snow and wind are blinding, and I've already lost sight of her. Where are you? I holler, calling Stowe's name over and over again. The storm is vicious. I can't see a foot in front of me. I forget how uneven the ground is and stumble. Ow! I scream as I feel my feet slip into a hole. My hands scrape the ground as I grasp a tuft of grass to break the fall, my legs dangling in the unknown. Must be the coat, but I seem to be wedged in place. I can't pull myself out, but at least I'm not falling any further. Help, I scream. Stowe, where are you? The wind drives snow up against my neck. Wish I could protect my face, but if I lift my hands, I might slip into whatever lies below. Help, help, I continue to shout. And then I hear a familiar voice. Wheaton, I hear you. Where are you? I'm coming. I don't see her approaching, but I keep shouting. Hold on, she yells, appearing in front of me. I'm stuck, I cry. Get me out of here. She kneels down on the ground, weaves her arms under my armpits, and tries to free me. You're wedged in pretty tight. Don't let go, I beg. My feet aren't touching the ground. This must be one of those ninja mine holes we saw from the air, she mutters. Put your arms around my neck and hold tight, she orders. When I start to pull, you wriggle if you can, and don't let go. The first few tries, I seem totally stuck. I'm starting to panic. If you can't get me out of here, I'm going to turn into a human popsicle. I'm remembering Dulay's warning. That's not an option, she barks at me. Let's try again. This time she squeezes me so hard that I break free of the hole. For a moment, it feels like I'm going to slip, but with Stowe holding tight, I slither out onto the frozen ground. We sit there stunned. You okay? She asks. I'm silent for a moment. I don't want to talk about how my heart is still pounding, so I change the subject. Did you catch the tent? She shakes her head. I lost sight of it as soon as it flew off. What do we do now? The storm hasn't let up. The driving snow feels like someone speed skating across my face. The wind is going in that direction, she points to our left. I'm so turned around, I don't know if it's east, west, north, or south. The tent must have flown with the wind, Stowe says. Let's follow, but hold my hand so we don't get separated or fall into any more holes. Having the wind behind us is good for our faces, but it's hard to put the brakes on. We don't see any more mine holes, a relief since we're being propelled, practically flying forward. It feels like we've been roaming out here a long time when the wind finally settles down and the precipitation stops. But it's just wicked cold and we're standing in an inch of snow. There's no sign of the tent. Let's go back to camp, Stowe suggests. Which way? Good question. I pull out my phone. There's no cell service, which means no GPS. Must have gone down during the storm, I tell Stowe. What do we do now, Dr. Techno Wizard? Hey, I'm not the one who took off without thinking. No way is she pinning this on me. At least I didn't let you go off and get lost by yourself. You're right, sorry. Stowe's face is red from the cold, but her eyes are squinting, a sign she's worried. What about Sarnai and our horses? What are they going to do? I don't know, I say. At least the horses were tied down. Hope they stayed that way. Maybe they can give Sarnai some warmth. How far do you think we've traveled? You think if we call out, she might hear us? Stowe shrugs. No clue, but we should try. Sarnai, 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 we holler as we rotate our bodies, shouting in every direction. It's so still now, you think our voices would carry a long distance, but we get no response. We try a couple more rounds of shouting, but the results are the same. The clouds have disappeared and whatever warmth was in the air is being sucked away at a rapid rate. We've got to find shelter, Stowe says. It's dangerous to be out here in this cold. We look around. I've never been in a place so empty. No houses, no people, no nothing. So if you want to find out if they ever get back to the start of the real rescue, you're going to have to read the book. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eva, for leaving us on that cliff of story. Next, we have Katy Kelly, and I can't imagine a book fest without her. Not only, so when she agreed to do a reading, we were thrilled. She is a native of Capitol Hill, and she also writes characters who live on Capitol Hill. She draws on her childhood experiences on the Hill to inform her series, both series, Lucy Rose and Melonhead, and we are lucky to have some readings from both, I think, today.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. And I'll dogleg to tell you, my family just passed 101 years on the same block on Constitution Avenue. So anyway, I'm going to read from Lucy Rose, Working Myself to Pieces and Bits. And my other book, Melonhead, just so you know what it looks like. Lucy Rose keeps a journal. April 24th. This morning, Jonique and I were having a visit with Eddie at Grubb's drugstore, and a lady came in to buy Berry Mary nail polish because she'd rather go to the nail spa, but she saves a fortune doing it herself, she said. That is a handy thing for us to hear, I said, because we are two girls that need a fortune. 1 second later, Enchanted Beauty bloomed up in my head. On the way home, I told Jonique, once we're in the beauty business, we will be in the money. How come, she said. People pay a lot for beauty, I told her. I know because my grandma, Shirley, she is rich. You would be amazed at all the jewelry she orders from TV. How much does she charge? Jonique asked. I don't know, I said, but it's a lot. Well, what do we need? The only thing we need, I told Jonique, was your completely deluxe portable nail kit. I have 2 brand new files, plus cuticle remover, plus tropical breeze lotion that makes you smell like you're at the beach, she said. At Jonique's, we got Mrs. McBee's mixing bowl and Jonique's kit, plus a brush in case a lady needs to have her hair refreshed. In my room, we found my comb that's hardly ever been used, and we pulled off the sheets from my bed. Then we looked outside and I said, man, oh man, it's raining like dogs. The weather always goes against us when we're going into business, Jonique said. That's okay, I told her. We'll start tomorrow. Today we can paint a sign that says grand opening. April 25th. Jonique and I hauled everything to Madam and Pop's house. Well, Pop said, where is this business going to be? Oh, we're going to set up in front of the carriage house, I told him. Perhaps I'll come out in a while and see about getting beautified, Pop said. Men do not get their fingernails painted, Jonique said. Of course not, Pop said. That would be nutty. I am talking about my toenails. He went back to writing about the Chesapeake Bay needing more crabs, and we went out to tape up our sign and all the hairdo pictures that came from my beauty spot calendar. I put one of my sheets on the ground for a rug, and on top we made an arrangement of a table and 4 white chairs with a display of our beauty supplies. Sam's mom was our first customer. And she said, since it is the grand opening, I will get Red Dazzle. You have an exciting attitude, I told her. To speed her along, we both polished at the same time, and I got a smudge on her thumb, so it looked a little bleeding, but she said, no one will notice because my other 9 fingers are so beautiful. Mrs. Deutsch got clear because it was too hard for her to decide. And Madam only had time to get her hands rubbed with Tropical Breeze. After that, no customers, only Melonhead. So we made him 2 tattoos for free. One is a big red dolphin with 3 babies, and the other is a black snake that goes around and around and around his whole other arm. Then he said, how much do haircuts cost? We have not done any haircuts, Jonique said. Yet, I said. I have $1, he said. That is how much they cost, I told him. Do you know how to cut hair? Jonique whispered. Don't you worry, I said. I have seen Shirley do it tons of times at the spot. Can I help? Jonique asked me. Of course, I said. We're partners. I got Madam's kitchen scissors. What style do you like? I asked Melonhead. Short, he said, and he pointed to the picture. Just do not give me sweet and sassy hair. Excellento, I said, and I started cutting in the front so he could see and have confidence. The thing about bangs is it is hard to get them straight, and so you have to cut the longer side to match the shorter side, and then you have to cut that side again, and I stopped when I got to his roots. Then I told Jonique, watch me do this side of his head, and you can do the other side. Should we be going that close to his skin? Jonique whispered. I watched Jonique do her side, and I told her, you have a gift for hair cutting. And I did mine. Don't worry, Melonhead, I said. I'll color in that naked spot with a Sharpie. Then I evened up my side so it would look like her side, and according to Shirley, matching sides is the key to a good haircut. The back was easiest, except for the part where Melonhead's hair is always sticking up on top, which I fixed by cutting off. Then I gave Melonhead the mirror. Thanks, he said. I have never looked better. He gave us his $1, and we gave him a giant glob of kiwi hair gel just for extra customer satisfaction. I hope we get a lot more haircuts, Jonique said. They are easier than nails. And faster, I said. So here is Melonhead with his fine new haircut. And Jonique and Lucy Rose. And as you can see, it's not entirely a haircut that everyone would go for. Your more conservative fellow might leave it alone. Sorry. April 26. My mom says I can't come out of my room for any reason whatsoever until I write a letter, which I just finished, and here's what it says. Dear Mrs. Mellon, I am sorry that I gave Adam a haircut without your permission, and I'm even sorrier that you don't like it and that you are going to get your family's picture taken next Saturday, which is the only time you can on account of Mr. Mellon's schedule, because he's always having to stay at work with his busy congressman boss. Plus, I feel utterly sorry that seeing that haircut made you feel like you couldn't breathe, and like you told me on the phone, saying it will grow back doesn't really help. But I think that it could grow back enough by Saturday that if Adam droops his head so you don't see that spot, maybe you could get those pictures taken anyway. This money is to pay for the buzz cut that is the only solution. I am truly sorry in my deepest heart, and believe me, I do wish I never did it. Your friend, I hope. P.S. I think that a long shirt could cover up most of the tattoos, and I feel regret galore that another thought I never had was about that marker being permanent. You were right when you said the next time I will. That is for sure. So, Lucy Rose and Melonhead they came to me pretty naturally because I have 2 sisters and a brother, and that was pretty much how we grew up. Michael always took the roofs across Capitol Hill. He'd skip from over one roof to another because he felt it was a shortcut.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Katie.
It was great.
I'd like to thank Rashin, Allison, Eva, and Katie. Somebody just commented that their 27-year-old daughter loves these readings. So thank you very much for supporting the Literary Hill BookFest virtual forum. And I encourage readers out there to go and support the authors. And I hope you'll find ways to use your power to help others.
Thank you. It was really fun.
Well, I thought Kitty's home haircutting advice was particularly apt for today's pandemic haircutting thing. So I think that worked out pretty well for all of us.
Absolutely. I cut my own bangs just for this, but I would much rather have had them cut by a character in Katie's book.
Absolutely. There's a lot to work with here on grooming, so if anyone wants to take a shot at it. Excellent. We're going to take a little break as we set up for the next panel, and we're going to roll into a couple more videos. Again, some more poets. You've had a chance to meet Ethelbert already on the first panel. He's going to be sharing one of his poems, or one of his musings there, and then our own Jonathan Lewis will be sharing his as well. So we're going to jump right over to that.
I'm going to read the title poem of my book, If God Invented Baseball, because there's no baseball right now. If God invented baseball, there would be no stealing, no balks, no wild pitches or intentional walks. There would be no pitch outs, foul balls or errors. There would be no one-hand catches or bean balls. There would be no curves or sliders, no rundowns or warning tracks. If God invented baseball, there would be no night games, no balls getting lost in the sun. There would be no bunting or swinging for the fences. There would be no double plays or triple plays. If God invented baseball, he would not rest on the 7th day. Instead, he would turn to us and say, let's play 2. He would let us bat first while his angels danced in the outfield.
Hello, I'm Jonathan Lewis. I'm standing here today in Crispus Attucks Park on a beautiful day, and I'd like to do a virtual reading for the Literary Hill Book Festival. This is a poem from my chapbook, Babylon, and the poem is about the Cherry Blossom Festival that happens each year in DC. Unfortunately, this year the tidal basin is closed, but we have a beautiful cherry blossom tree right behind me, and that seems really fitting. This poem is called Haname. Old woman sleeps beneath 2 Yoshino cherry trees, snowflakes in her hair. Tourists choke the tidal pools, pink parasols abound, confetti in a chow chow's fur. Cumulus branches stretch over the Manzanar Memorial, etched ravines run white, red. Koi plow through the basin, inhale each burst of constellation, release petals to the sea.
That was beautiful. Are we on?
We're good.
Okay. Well, that was a lovely interlude. I'd like to remind everybody that please visit our website if you'd like to buy any of the books from our authors. Most of our authors have their own websites with a link to learn more about the authors and buy their books. But if you have any questions about how to buy their books, if you're not clear, you can always send us an email at info@literaryhillbookfest.org, and we will make sure to connect you with the book that you want. I'm going to introduce our second panel, from Joris P. Prudence to Abe Lincoln, Making Characters Come Alive in Fiction and Nonfiction. We're really excited about this one. Our moderator for this panel today is E.J. Wenstrom. She's a fantasy and science fiction author whose award-winning series Chronicles of the Third Realm features a mashup of Greek mythology, Judeo-Christian folklore, and an extra dash of her own special brand of chaos. You can read the review of the latest title in her series, Spark, in the Hill Rag. When she isn't writing fiction, she is a regular contributor to DIY MFA and Book Riot, and co-hosts the Fantasy Plus Girl podcast. She's also been a stalwart featured author at our book fest in the past. Her panelists today include Lou Bayard, who you met earlier. He's the author of the historical romance Courting Mr. Lincoln. He's also an instructor at George Washington University, a board member for the Penn Faulkner Foundation, and the author of the popular Downton Abbey recaps for the New York Times. He will be joined in conversation with Colleen Shogan. She's a political scientist by training. Hi, Colleen. She's the author. Now, if she weren't doing enough, she also started writing the Washington Whodunit series, most recently Gore in the Garden. She previously worked as and I don't think she means Al Gore there. I think that's a different use of Gore, right, Colleen? I think, yeah. She previously worked as a legislative staffer in the Senate and as a senior executive at the Library of Congress. Currently, she's the senior vice president at the White House Historical Association. We're also welcoming James Mann. He's the author of 7 books on American politics and national security issues. His most recent title is The Great Rift, Dick Cheney, Colin Powell, and the Broken Friendship That Defined an Era. He's a longtime correspondent for the Los Angeles Times and a fellow at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. We also are welcoming today Jessica Childress. She's a DC attorney whose first book for children, The Briefcase of Jurisprudence, served as the springboard for the Jurisprudence Academy, a DC-based legal education program for kids in grades 8 through 12. And finally, David Rapp. He's a journalist and author of a book about the 1908 Chicago Cubs. So if you're missing baseball, pick up this wonderful book, Tinker to Evers to Chance, The Chicago Cubs and the Dawn of Modern America. He retired in November 2014 after a 30-year career in Washington journalism, most of which was spent with Congressional Quarterly. So, thank you, panelists.
Thank you, Liz, and thanks to everyone who's joining us now. We're really excited for this conversation. As Liz mentioned, I'm E.J. Wenstrom. I'm the author of the Chronicles of the Third Realm War series and a Navy Yard neighborhood resident. And I'm thrilled to be here today with my Capitol Hill neighbors and talented fellow authors to moderate this panel on creating great, complex characters that feel real and leap off the page across both fiction and nonfiction. It's one of my favorite aspects of the writing craft and such an interesting topic to explore. And I want to make the most of our time. So with that brief introduction, let's go ahead and kick this off to our panelists. And one final note, please, this is meant to be interactive. So we've reserved some time at the end to take your questions, but please do not feel you need to wait for that. Go ahead and submit them now if you like, or as they come up throughout our chat using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. So with that said, let's get started. And here's my first question for our panelists. What makes a great character come alive? What do you look for in a great character?
I'll kick it off. I love to see a character that is flawed. Even our most ideal character, I want to know what challenges her or him, what their fears are, and how they react to challenge in relation to other characters who may be seemingly perfect, but also have flaws. So I want to see that juxtaposition and that character interplay. So I think a great character has perfections and has things that they strive for, but also has challenges, and they're not the perfect person. And I love to see that interplay amongst characters.
I would add that for me, a great character has autonomy of a kind. You get the sense that they can literally walk off the page and exist independently of the work they come out of. You could even imagine running into them in the street. So they're obviously created by an author, but in a sense they live outside that author's control, at least when I read them.
Oh, I will add, I'm the biographer in here. I can't create the characters. They are there, and in the ones I choose, they have the flaws, and it's my job to describe how they got those flaws. And also, in the case of my own book, which is a dual biography, the relationship between the characters and what happened to them.
And I think when I write a series, my books are a part of a series, and that poses a particular challenge because you're seeing the same character, the protagonist, and other characters over and over again. And what I think when you're writing a series is that you have to make sure that your characters change in important ways, because people change in important ways over time. And sometimes I think with series, characters can get into a rut. And I think that can turn readers off at times. So I'm always thinking about, okay, how is my main character going to change in this book? What challenges is she going to have that she didn't have in previous books? And how are some of my other supporting characters also going to change in relation to her?
I think that's a really good point about change. In my case, I had 3 coming of age stories, essentially. With my 3 ball players and where they came from. But what I was trying to do was chart their progress and how they came, what culture they came out of, and then how that influenced them when they moved into a brand new culture like urban Chicago in the turn of the century.
Thanks so much. Those are some really great insights into what makes a character what they are. I love that. When you're creating a new character, where do you start?
Well, for me, it starts with the voice. It's the voice. It's either the narrative voice or the voice that comes out in dialogue. I need to know kind of what they sound like. I need to hear the person behind that, the personality behind that character. So for me, it's a voice exercise at first.
I think since I write mysteries, and sort of mysteries in a traditional sense, sort of in the tradition of like Agatha Christie, where there's a lot of characters. A really good suggestion came to me very early on, I think from an editor, which is you have to make your characters distinctive, especially if you're going to have a lot of characters, in my case, a lot of suspects. I have to make sure that the reader is able to follow those characters. So when I look at my list of characters, as I'm starting to think about the plot of my book, I want to make sure that not only myself as a writer, I can distinguish between them, but also as a reader, they can follow along and know who I'm talking about when my protagonist is interacting with the various characters.
For me, I want to know, I'd like to start off with what drives each individual character. What's their internal motivation for what they're trying to accomplish in the book? Because I think every character, I write about little girls and they're in the background, if you're wondering what these little graduation caps are. But I write about girls who are ambitious and industrious, but they all have individual drives. And some of their drives are motivated by pleasing their parents. Some just have the internal drive to do good in the world. And so I'd like to know what their internal motivation is, because that's really going to dictate all of their actions in the book.
That's very true. And like James mentioned, when you can't create a character in nonfiction, you essentially have to choose a character that interests you and appeals to you, and which is what drew me to this particular area, because each of these guys who are in this iconic poem, whose names are well known, but no one actually knows who they are or where they came from, each represented a very different and distinct regional culture in late 19th century America. So they represented something that was embodied in their upbringing and their personalities and in the way they worked together. But again, it's not a matter of creating them. You have to essentially find them, and through a variety of research methods.
Yeah, when you're writing about people like Colin Powell and Dick Cheney, it's a little different because your audience knows the characters, at least at a superficial level. You have to describe where it came from. But then I spend a good part of this book examining the theories about them. Did Dick Cheney change? Or was he always conservative? My book says the latter. What was it about Colin Powell that caused him to be such a hero in the early years and for people to be so disappointed in him? So it's taking the characters as they were and describing what made them tick.
That's really interesting. And it's so true that when you're dealing with nonfiction, of course, you find the characters that are already there and then have to do what, you know, they've already handed you everything. It's a matter of how you present it. But you do have the ability to choose who you write about for nonfiction. So for the nonfiction authors, what do you look for in, you know, the characters available to you in real life that you know, kind of use as those guidelines or parameters that tell you, yes, this is a great character right here. This is what I should write about.
Well, in my case, it was, I was trying to answer a question that began with, why am I still a Cub fan after 50 plus years of unrequited loyalty? And so I started looking back into the history of the Chicago Cubs to see if I could find something that would help me answer that. And I landed on this period and these three names, Tinker, Evers, and Chance, and found out they each had a very different backstory. And the backstory in each case was about how America fell in love with baseball at the turn of the century. And it wasn't a foreordained thing to happen because baseball was in disrepute at the time in the 1890s. It was a very ugly game, very dirty, and yet these three guys came out of that with the support of their families, and so anyway, and each had a kind of different reason for why baseball sort of became something for them to pursue as a vocation. But anyway, and again, it wasn't just a baseball story. I think that's the other thing that made it interesting. It was really about American social history, which it's hard to find many baseball players who help you do that. The ones that do have already been written about a lot, and these weren't. So.
Yeah, in my case, it was really a two-step process. I'd written an earlier book that was about all of the members of George W. Bush's war cabinet called Rise of the Vulcans. There were 6 of them. It was a group biography. But I wanted to look back over a decade later, and I chose 2 of them, Powell and Cheney, as lead antagonists, but also because they each symbolize something. They symbolize 2 different strains of thought about how the United States should deal with the world after the Cold War. And I, if on those strains of thought, I could have chosen Rumsfeld instead of Cheney, for example. But Cheney was the more interesting character to me.
It's funny, I find myself kind of between 2 camps because like David and Jim, I write about historical figures. The last one was about young Abraham Lincoln, young Mary Todd, Joshua Speed. But as a novelist, I get to invent and speculate. So it's a weird kind of hybrid process. But in the end, I wind up thinking of them as fictional characters, but just trying to respect as much the historical boundaries that within which they lived.
Sure. Thank you. One more question, and then we've got a couple coming in from our viewers that I will get to in a moment. But what is our responsibility as authors to diverse characters, and especially in a time when we are seeing a lot of focus on own voices, which is so important? How do you respect representation while also respecting lifting up actual diverse voices representing themselves?
Well, I'll kick something off because I've got a particular I had a particular challenge in my case because baseball was a segregated sport from the late 19th century to the mid 20th century, and it kind of was outside the boundaries of my main story in that regard. But it still felt like it was important to not ignore it or dismiss it. At the same time, not take the story off the rails of my particular story. So that was one thing. Another was I discovered a woman character. In my case, it was the wife of the manager of the Chicago Cubs at the time, who was quite a personality in her own right, and was featured in a story in the Chicago Tribune at the time. And then I was able to pursue her story and her backstory, an Irish immigrant, and who loved baseball, was probably the first woman sports writer in America at the time. She went followed her team to the West Coast for spring training and sent back dispatches to the newspaper. Anyway, so that was again a way for me to help find readers who weren't necessarily baseball fanatics or focused totally on the game of baseball, to help flesh out the social history of the story.
And I think that we all have, EJ, a responsibility to bring diverse stories to the fore. Jurisprudence was really born out of my experience as a lawyer working in non-diverse settings and wanting to show children that lawyers should come from all sections of society, should represent all races and all genders. And jurisprudence's best friends come from, jurisprudence is an African-American girl, but her best friends come from many, many backgrounds. She has a friend who's Hispanic, who's South Korean, who has 2 dads. And those stories are not my stories, but I still felt like I wanted to show the non-nuclear family structure. Jurisprudence lives with her grandparents, but I did not live with my grandparents. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents when I was growing up. So I borrowed pieces of stories that I had and appropriated them to this character, but I also told stories that I didn't have a personal experience with, but I had done the research or had friends who lived those experiences. So when I'm telling other people's stories, I really try to be sensitive to making sure that I'm not promoting a stereotype, making sure that I'm telling that story from a position of research and not promoting stereotypes that are based in negativity. And so that's really where I find that there's a very unique responsibility that authors do have when telling stories where they don't have individual experience and individual perspective.
It's a really fraught question that Jessica raises. She used the word appropriate, and there's been a lot of debate and struggle really in the writing community about what constitutes cultural appropriation. What are our stories to tell? You know, what stories are we able to tell? And it's been a really interesting time. I mean, there's been a lot of heat around the American Dirt, for instance, and books like that, also in the YA world.
Yeah, I think it's a question that we'll all within this industry, in this art form, continue to wrestle with for a long time, as we should. All right, I'm going to give some questions from the audience now. Joy M has asked, for all the authors, what are some of your favorite characters in books that you've read?
I have a favorite character, and it's a local author, so I can promote another local author. I thought about this a little bit, and of course I read a lot in mystery. Another terrific local mystery writer, not from Washington, D.C., but from the surrounding DMV area, is Ellen Crosby. And she writes a really fun series if you're looking for something light to read during this crisis. She writes a series of wine country mysteries set in Virginia, so not far from Washington, D.C. Her protagonist is a young woman named Lucy Montgomery, who has inherited one of the vineyards. But Lucy is a complex character. In my world, in traditional or cozy mysteries, sometimes protagonists can be a little sweet, on the sweet side, and a little bit perfect. And Lucy is not perfect. In fact, she has a physical disability that she has to overcome. And she's got some personality traits that some people might consider challenging or difficult. So I really think that that's the gold standard. You can still tell these types of amateur sleuth stories, but you can have a complex character who, once again, is facing adversity and overcoming challenges as you're telling the story around her.
Well, I have a kind of an off-the-wall suggestion. I'm fascinated by Wyatt Earp, the Marshal of Tombstone, and I've read everything I can get my hands on about him because I just think it's a fascinating character because of the moral ambiguity that kind of shrouds his life. Not to himself; he had no ambiguity about his own moral standing. He thought he was doing justice, but it's a fascinating the way different people react to him over time, and you can see he's become like an archetype in character development. Elmore Leonard's Raylan Givens is essentially a Wyatt Earp type character, surrounded by moral ambiguity, but except not to himself. T.E. Lawrence of Lawrence of Arabia was kind of the same kind of person. He was on a mission from God in his own mind, and yet everything about him was ambiguous and not quite clear about what was happening. So anyway, that's where I started with Wyatt Earp.
I have two characters. They're the two women in Elena Ferrante's Neapolitan novels. I think there are 4 novels, Lila and Elena. And what I think makes it so wonderful, they're marvelously complex. And because she has 4 novels in effect to unspool their lives, you get to see how they change in the same ways we've been talking about in a way that's just so mesmerizing and powerful. So I devoured those books, Elena Ferrante.
I love the character Celestial in An American Marriage by Tiari Jones. She is grappling with her husband being incarcerated and dealing with this idea of the duties of a wife. And I love the way that the narrative of love changes over the course of this book and the way that her character evolves in loving her independence while also grappling the fact that she has to still be loyal to someone who she's promised to be loyal to despite a wrongful incarceration. So that has been one of my recent favorite characters.
Right. And one other question coming in now, and as a reminder for other viewers, you can submit your questions right now. We'd love to have them. Use that little Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And while we wait for more to come in, I'll go ahead and read our other question for our panelists. For the nonfiction writers, how do you ensure the story you are telling is as honest as possible?
Well, that's a really good question because especially in baseball history, it's hard because a lot of baseball history is written by sports writers, contemporaneous sports writers who made stuff up. So it was really hard to nail things down. At the same time, the reader doesn't really want to know what you think is true or not. He just wants to know what you think is true. So you have to kind of pick your way through this and then give the reader what you think is your best judgment about what actually happened. And to do that, you have to triangulate. You have to read a lot of different accounts of what happened from different sources. And you have to try to understand your character enough to know what they would do at any particular moment, if it made sense or not. And if you immerse yourself in the times and the characters, I found in the end, it wasn't, it was hard to do, but ultimately it wasn't that difficult.
Well, in my case, are we on? I use only my own primary sources. I don't rely on secondary sources. So that means I can rely on my own interviews and the archives that I go through. And I like to tell people that I have to go through, stay in places like College Station, Texas, which is where the George H.W. Bush Presidential Library is, or Simi Valley, California, to look through those archives so that the poor reader doesn't have to do that. So to me, you know, it's a given that what you're working on is the information that you yourself have found and discovered. Well, great. I'm getting the signal that it's time for us to wrap this up.
I'll give one last opening if anyone has the closing thought or takeaway that they want to give to our participants today.
Sure, buy my book.
Buy all our books.
Definitely encourage all of our viewers today to check out the websites of all of these authors, take a look at their books. Another great place to find some compelling characters and explore this topic further. And with that, I'll go ahead and hand this back to Liz and Tim. Thanks so much for hosting us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, CJ.
All right. Thanks so much, Emily, and to all the panelists. That was a great job there. We really appreciated all of that. We're going to do another video, a little interlude right here as we set up the next panel. We've got Jonathan Lewis at a very, very crowded, inappropriately socially distancing Easter Market, it looks like there in his background. We're going to jump into him and his poetry selections in just a few minutes here. But first, we're going to talk to, we're going to hear a video from Liz Brinker. And this is particularly well timed. We had some of our panelists in previous sections, both Lou and Ethelbert have talked about the importance, and others talk about the importance of music and how it interplays with literature, or how it interplays with what we're doing right now. So I think we're all going to enjoy Liz Brinker's selection here.
1, 2, 3, 4. A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I never learned to spell, at least not well. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I never learned to count a great amount. But my busy mind is burning to use what learning I've got. I won't waste any time. I'll strike while the iron is hot. If they ask me, I could write a book about the way you walk and whisper and look. I could write a preface on how we met, so the world would never forget. And the simple secret of the plot is just to tell them that I love you a lot. Then the world discovers as my book ends how to make two lovers of friends. Used to hate to go to school. I never cracked a book. I played the hook. Never answered any mail to write. I used to think was wasted ink. It was never my endeavor to be too clever and smart. Now suddenly I feel a longing to write in my heart. If they ask me, I could write a book about the way you walk and whisper and look. I could write a preface on how we met, so the world would never forget. And the simple secret of the plot is just to tell them that I love you a lot. Then to make two lovers of, make two lovers of, make two lovers of, friend. Oh yeah.
Hello. Are we back?
We are back, and I think we're back. We're ready. We have a full roster of poets here, it looks like. So why don't we turn this over to Jonathan, and you can tell us all about your folks.
Before we do, I've just become aware that we had one glitch so far, not a bad record for our first virtual event, but we had an exhibitor from 826 DC. We had Kelsey McClure from that organization here to talk about her organization. And we had, I guess we didn't realize she was in line to talk. We didn't realize she was ready online. So we want to give a shout out to 826 DC. It's DC's local chapter of Dave Eggers' writing program for kids. It's an awesome organization. We love them. They've been an exhibitor for us in the past, and they have a YouTube page, and we have a link to that, or we will have a link to that on our website. So we're very sorry, Kelsey. We love 826 DC. Check them out, everybody. And if we ever do this again, we will not let this happen again. So we're going to, we want to thank our longtime partner also, Tunnicliffe's Tavern, on whose patio we usually hold our poetry event. Looks like Jonathan's there. Wow, that's amazing. Until we wish that we could be together face to face at our poetry event. We look forward to the day when we can do that again, but it's not going to stop us. We're going to do it virtually right now.
Thanks, Liz. So yes, everyone, welcome to the 6th annual Poets Corner at the Literary Hill BookFest. As Liz mentioned, I'm currently back in time, Tunnicliffe's Tavern last year. And in addition to what Liz said, I mean, we're really grateful. Every year, Tunnicliffe's Tavern lets us temporarily take over their patio and turn it into a bohemian sidewalk cafe. And I also want to add that Tunnicliffe's is still open. They're doing takeout and curbside pickup. So please support them. They've been wonderful partners, and we can't wait to do that with them again next year. So welcome, everyone. I was listening to the panel this morning on how literature can sustain us during a crisis. And what was interesting is that a lot of the authors talked about how much we turn to poetry during times like this, and how poetry really carries us. So we are very fortunate to have 9 wonderful DC poets with us today. I'd like to introduce our first terrific poet. It's Terry Ellen Cross Davis.
Hi, Terry. Hi everyone. So I'll just jump right in. And thank you for having me. And it's so great to be on this virtual stage and this virtual platform with so many other great poets. I see Eugene and I see Patricia Gray. So I'll just start with 2 poems that are from my newest book, which will be out in February of 2021. And it's called A More Perfect Union. It won this manuscript won the Journal Charles B. Willer Poetry Prize, which I have to say Jean Nordhaus won with her book Innocence. And so that's kind of what hit me to the prize in many ways. But I wanted to read these 2 poems from it. And this first one is called Thank You, Jesus. When the blue and red sirens pass you, when the school calls because your child beat the exam and not a classmate, when the smartphone drops but does not crack, the rush escaping your mouth betrays your upbringing. Thank you, Jesus, a balm over the wound. When the mammogram finds only density, when the playground tumble results in a bruise, not a broken bone, like steam from a hot tea kettle, thank you, Jesus, and the pent-up fear vents upward out. Maybe it's a hand over breast, supplication learned deeper than flesh, as if one could shush the soul, the fluttering heartbeat, with 3 words. Maybe it's not so dire, an almost trip on the sidewalk, the accumulated sales total showing savings upon savings. Maybe it's as small as an empty seat on the metro, or maybe "Thank you, Jesus" becomes the refrain every time your husband pulls into the driveway, alive and whole, and no one has mistaken him for all the black scary things. You mutter it, helpless to stop yourself from the invocation of a grandmother who gave you your first Bible. You say it because your mother, even knowing your doubt as a vested commodity, still urges prayer. You learned early to cast the net. Thank you, Jesus. And it's a sweet needle that gathers the fraying thread, hemming security in steady stitches. From birth, you've heard this language. As an adult, you've seen religion used nakedly as ambition, yet this sacrifice of praise still slips past your lips, this lyrical martyr of your dying faith. And then I just wanted to read one more poem, and this is called "The Goddess of Cleaning." And I will just, I will dedicate this poem to all of us right now in this pandemic, as we do epic amounts of cleaning all the time, I'm sure. So, "The Goddess of Cleaning." I bequeath you bleach, its singeing sting. I bequeath you the scrub brush, best done on hands and knees. I bequeath you ammonia for the exorcism of dirt. I bequeath you power over clutter, the washing machine's spin, the dryer's lint grin. I bequeath you the salvation of sweeping, a consecrated grip on the broomstick. I bequeath you the dustpan's collection plate, the floor's sanctified echo, the trash bin's penitent face. I bequeath you the gospel of a mop, the sacred slosh of a rinse bucket's second coming. I bequeath you the torn t-shirt as rag, the two-sided sponge, vinegar and newspaper squeak, the glass free of squeak. I bequeath you old toothbrush for tiles hard to reach grime. I bequeath you the grunt and scrub of wool, the eradication of rust. Trust in me, I baptize you in sweat, labor's beatific stain. I bequeath you the power to change, one room at a time. So. Thank you. Thank you all for listening. And thank you for a chance to read this year virtually. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Terry. Our next great poet is Janet Umble Reedy.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to be reading two poems, both of them inspired by time I spent living in Southeast Asia. First one comes from the city of Yogyakarta in Indonesia, a city that is overshadowed by Mount Merapi, a huge volcano, a huge active volcano. It begins with an epigraph from the book of Jeremiah. "Is not my word like fire, says the Lord, and like a hammer which breaks the rock in pieces?" The title is Fire and Hammers. 4 times the moon has waxed and waned since we left Java in the rainy season. Time enough for the village women to plant and harvest another crop of rice. We carried umbrellas for protection from the sun, ablaze high in the sky by 8 in the morning, and from the pounding downpour every afternoon. The buckets on the floor, a futile attempt to catch the water dripping from the saturated ceiling, slowly dripping from the light fixture above the bed. Those were days of fire and hammers. The sun's rays scorching our white skin, melting us, reshaping us even as we resisted. The pounding of the hammers of the silversmiths reverberated with the call to prayer through the days and nights, knocking off our rough edges, rearranging the pieces. We walked at dawn each morning toward the volcano, past the women wrapped in faded batik cloth, their backs bent, pushing rice seedlings one by one into the muddy field. Some days, the volcano, purple against blue sky, spewed smoke from fires deep inside. Some days, gray clouds blocked the view as if the ancient crone had pulled a shawl across her face to hide from us. Emerald green shoots, nurtured by the burning sun and pounding rain, grew heavy with yellow grain, stalks bending like the women who walked across the fields in rows, harvesting with sharp blades curved like quarter moons. Long whips parting the air with a crack, grunts and curses issuing from their throats, hungry farmers battling hungry birds for precious grains of rice. 4 times the moon has waxed and waned since we left Java in the rainy season. The fire that burned with such intensity is now remembered with nostalgia as a full moon, round globe suspended, glowing, shimmering, rising above an ancient Hindu temple in the night. The second poem comes from Hanoi, Vietnam, where the streets were kept clean by crews of elderly women who had long brooms. Hanoi sweepers. Rising before dawn, wizened old women in baggy black trousers are sweeping the sidewalks, rearranging the dust, dispatching the trash, dispersing the ghosts that lurk in the corners. The city redeemed from the hovering chaos. The day can begin. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Janet. Our next featured poet is Naomi Thier.
Hello, very happy for a chance to read. Thank you for the Capital Literary Fest for going on and for having me. I assume you'll let me know if you can't hear me. I'm going to read 2 poems that have a sort of a DC connection, DC area. First one has to do with the way when someone has died and passed on, they'll kind of come back to us in little bits, at little random moments. And the DC connection is that it mentions Jacqueline Potter, who I think some of you certainly knew, who was a wonderful, wonderful poetry promoter in the area, who died about 7 years ago. So this is called How They Come Back to Us. How they come back to us. Those who have died, their roots still spread, their fires still spread, smoking underground. They emerge as tree roots will, bursting out of earth, far from the hollow where we once dropped in memory. So long ago, it's only a flash, something that happened to a paper doll. What comes back full color are faces, pieces of faces, Grandma's powdered cheek, red fuzz at Chris's temple, Patty's eyes, the bare blue of sky after rain, and their never replaceable voices. Sit with me once. How you doing there, Papa Son? I wouldn't have that, Rosie. I wouldn't have that. Sparks of their movement blaze. Say how they danced. Karen's arms twirling overhead. Chris's plant and stomp in Birkenstocks. Their pet ideas float in the margins as we read. As Jacqueline's motto was suddenly there on a brick in Chincoteague. Toujours le mot, stamped with her signature. Like creeper vines shooting beneath lawns, bursting out to wind around trees minding their own business, the dead come to decorate strange places with their unmistakable shapes, their sudden air bracing, their unseen heat beneath keeping us warm. I'm going to do one more. Both these poems are from my upcoming book called Made of Air, which is going to be out in early 2020 from Kelsey Press. I'm delighted to say. The connection on this one is to South Arlington, which is where I now live. My condo looks right over 4 Mile Run, the beautiful long creek that goes through Arlington. So this is about sitting on my balcony, watching as Hurricane Sandy unfolded. And I wanted to read it partly to remind us that all disasters do end, and there's often a newness that comes afterward. This is called After. At times, we feel the fresh earth lift itself back into place after the torque, the screech of damage twisted it unrecognizable. Spun it sudden, a delicate toy hurled into the rush of traffic. 2 days of brittle gray, metal pound of rain and wind, turning the sky to a kettle lid that clamps but can't contain the boil. Trees smashing their backs toward earth, Branches and balconies corkscrewed, shopping carts drifting upstream on 4 Mile Run. Then a cloak, a calm, even ambient light blacked out. After sleep, we emerge, register in our cells the absence of howl. We walk onto sodden grass, limbs accounted for, sun like a greeting. And with her skirt its familiar blue, unfaded as ever and slightly rippling, she steps unconcerned before us, our sky. Thank you very much. Look forward to hearing the rest of the readers.
Thanks, Naomi. Our next great reader is Michael Levin.
Hey, Jonathan, and hi to everybody, and thanks for this opportunity to show up before the Capitol Hill BookFest again, if you can call this again. I just want to note that this is a little bit of a family reunion for me because Adam Russell, who was reading last, turns out to be my godson. I'm going to read 3 short poems from my new chapbook, Falcons, which is coming out from Finishing Line Press, end of June. Falcons, this is the title poem. Let loose the falcons, let their jesses fly. Their fierce wings cast no shadows in a sunless sky. Their yellow glares click swiftly through steep stoops, the dive, the deadly tear, reflecting nothing while absorbing all. So actors float, then swoop to seize small motions that may body thought. So artists fold their wings and drop like stones to pounce on transient hues. So hunger fuels those flights that yearn to enter lives and see with different sight, a risky game where hunters can be prey and feathered death is turnabout, fair play. Reminders that when streaking back towards lures and rest hoods, we may go missing, burn up like the phoenix, or by chance announced by ankle bells, return. Cam Ranh, Vietnam, 1970. Guts on floor, no good for self-image. So not like x-rays in calm black and white. What you thought body turned inside out like a glove, who knew you carried? Sliding down bunker where concrete dust drifts, heavy with silence. Hearing the tramp of blood in your ears, rising, rising, coming on like dusk. We're not books, though we can be opened. Don't ask. The purple sheen answers, naked as newborns, insists what we are. Later. Later, I'll cry for you, but not now. With house wrens return to their snow-split box above the new daffodils, burbling their 5-note code of starts and renewals. Our red-nailed crepe myrtle sways to a kite breeze, shimmies in afternoon light. Separate, the root condition, Odysseus's long yearning. Yet yellowheads dance while the ghost of your body surrounds me, rich as a plowed field, its hollows loamy and grooved. All yours, Donovan.
Thanks so much, Mike. Our next great reader is Yirmiyuhu Aaron Taub.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, festival organizers. Thank you all. I'm going to start with a poem from an earlier plague. It's an untitled poem from my second book of poems. That book was called What Stillness Illuminated. And there's an English and Yiddish version, and I'll read both. The men in dark dresses and peach day lips crooned farewell. Their bangles chimed against the plague shovels. This boy had crowned November evenings. They lowered the box into insatiable earth. Out of sight, an old man whispered ancient words into the wind. Die Männer in dunkle Kleidlach und verschüttete Lippen haben sich Gesang gesegnet. Ihre Brasletten haben geklungen entgegen die Magefe schuflen. Der Bocher hat gekroint, Cheshven Oventen. Sie haben herabgelost dem Kasten in unsättiglicher Erd. Michutz dem Eugenreich hat ein alter Jid hereingeschuschget, uralte Wörter in Wind. And this poem is called Idyll. Cherish this banality, my love, the day unfurling into splendor. Coffee from below drifts into our reading layers. A lawnmower hums in the distance. Earth and wind intoxicating us from dream. Your footsteps patter down the corridor. Your night clothes gleam where the sun does not pierce. A vision so fleeting, yet glimpsed these countless times. Today, I won't rise to catch it. I'll know you're there simply by the measure of my reverie. Carved in calm, unmoved by the neighbor dogs yapping. The weekend section spreads amply around the dining room table, marked by circles of varying urgency. Perhaps we will forage for treasure abandoned. Perhaps we will sample the fruits of vineyards coaxed into perfection. Before we go to wherever we go, I want to lift your hair, nuzzle your nape, whisper my tender, grateful nothings. Whatever these hours shall hold, this is good, this is plenty. Thank you.
Thank you, Yirmiyahu. Our next featured poet is Chris Haley.
Hi, thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Literary Hill BookFest. This is my first time on here, so I guess you could say I'm a Virginian who's born in DC. So thank you again. To check on what I'm doing, I have a website my dear friend Chris Stinson put together, so plug for him. It's called ChrisHaleySpeaks.com. I am still an author in search of a publisher, so peep out. This first poem is called An African-American Dream of 2018. I had a dream last night. I was hanging with the elite, eating high, drinking fine, on a sofa, on a patio, by a pool, big as a sea. But I became drowsy. We became drowsy. It seemed inappropriate to me that I should spend the night with my new fellows, though they were as comforting as could be. So, dark as it was, shadowed as I was by a moonlight sparking above me, I tiptoed, running to the long gated corridor like a kid afraid he'd broken curfew, surreptitiously. I looked all the way down to the opening to the grounds where there was security. I was scared. I was frightened. They might not fully see me. Though I was a guest among their best, obscured by dark, what would I be? Even in the light, I'd be a scuttling nigger, and frightened for their lives, they'd shoot me. In this dream, something happened. An alarm alerted the guards. There was frenzy. I didn't cause it. It was sparked by something else. But still, dogs and lights, a small army gathered at the gate. I pressed against the wall, cold and flat. I thought if I lay like that, a short time would lapse. They'd be less busy. All would be calm. They laid down their arms. I could walk out, free and easy. But a cop saw the light, my cell phone reflected in the night, and ran fast, approaching me. I held up my arms, said I meant no harm. My iPhone innocently gleamed. but some behind him shot. He fell on the spot. I guess they blamed me. I heard the retorts, but felt nothing short of the dread I feared of being seen. Then, on my phone's face, blood splashed quickly, and I could taste warm liquid in my mouth. I passed out. Another dangerous African American, armed with what looked like a weapon, erased. These are my dreams of 2018. The next poem is called Four Cherries. Seated side by side at the bar, our bodies turn in toward each other. I cross my right leg above my left at the ankle. My knee rests on your thigh, muscular, warm. Your leg stays put, passive bottom to my dominant top. I lift the skewer from my Manhattan and point it toward your lips. Are you offering me your cherry? You say. I laugh and say, yes. Your eyes and mouth widen. Your teeth lure the fruit between your lips. Your jaw crushes the juice from the meat. I chew the next, and fleshy pulp explodes in my mouth. We stare. We ravish the last two liquor-engorged blood purple plums. My knee tenses against your thigh. Check, please, we say. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Chris. Our next featured poet is Jean Nordhaus.
Thank you, Jonathan. And it's very nice to see the pictures behind you of earlier BookFest and to see many people, participants and people in that crowd who I haven't seen for a while, including Naomi. It's been a very long time. My mother was the fifth child in a large immigrant family in New York. And she was not very good with modern technology that came along later in her life, but she did love the ATM machine. Streets of gold. My mother, how is it I always come back to her? Swaddled in her bathrobe, tiny in the corduroy recliner, watching Golden Girls. Someone had to set the TV up for her. She never learned to turn it on or off. But the ATM? Miraculous, she said. You put your card in, punch the keys, and out comes money. Heady for a child of the Depression, orphan of tenements and smoke. Like those tales of boundless gold that brought her parents to America. Green bills sliding from the slot, simple as leaves from the maple, ample as milk from the breast. And the second poem I'm going to read, second and last, just set in the subway, and it was written at a time when everybody was concerned and talking about terrorism, but it applies equally well to a current situation when a virus has become the common enemy. It's called The Innocent, and it is the title poem from my book, Innocence, that Terry referred to. Alone and together, we stand on the platform, a mob of strangers awaiting a train. There may be among us a wife beater, surely a thief, that man in the blue dolphin tie, that frazzled mother gathering in her scattered girls, each of us caught in the swill of our being, none of us blameless, not one of us pure. Greedy, covetous, selfish, vain. We have trafficked in lies. We have practiced small cruelties. Even the baby asleep in a sling on his mother's breast has been willful, has shaken with rage. Yet if fate arrives as a wind in a bullet, a bomb, at the instant of shock, in the silent heart of conflagration, we will all be transformed into innocence, cleansed in the fires of violence, punished not for any sins committed, but for standing where we stand, together in the soft, the vulnerable flesh. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. Our next featured poet is Patricia Gray.
Thank you, John. Good to see everyone. Thank you to the book festival. Suppose that you've had the virus and you have left the hospital now to return. And this poem is called Recovery. When you've come home from the hospital, familiar and strange, to a house that seems not to know you, each movement is deliberate, breath very clear, and everything slower. Time liquefies, and you move through it as if through water. The film of your life in slow-mo, picked up from the cutting room floor, each frame jerking along until you notice it comes back as if to a child who must touch every beautiful thing. Time, elastic, lets you stretch before you snap back, to enjoy what dangles each moment like a thread. You could unravel, but choose to knit up, enchanted by this new remaking. And this one is called Elegy. I have watched the river lapse into the sea, felt the sea turn its tongue on me, heard the tree laughter seize upon us, chuckling as branches cracked where we stood stoic and starched. And I remember the shade and sun, the grazing green shadows where we once made love, the chenille feel of your blanket, peace of our lake water summer. And I know the cool milk of morning, that smooth pen I used to write when you married a new love, making your way across time. Memories between us remained unbroken. And though your span was shortened unduly, you remain where you once set foot, when I felt your breath and knew what your heart gave away in the waves that continues to make. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Our next featured poet is Adam Russell.
All right, Jonathan, can you hear me?
I can hear you, loud and clear.
All right, as always, also thank you to the organizers for this, for you, Jonathan, for hanging in there. I know I've been a bit of a management headache, partly because I was actually hoping I wouldn't have a poem to read. I had the great good luck when I graduated from university to spend a year with the Southern novelist and poet Reynolds Price, who's now deceased. And I would travel with him and he would give talks. And invariably, someone would ask a question, Dr. Price, how do you write a poem you're happy with? And his response was invariably, if you can do anything else, do that first. And I've taken that to heart. When the pandemic started, I think everybody here knew something was going to germinate out of this, and like a slow bullet, I was hoping I could dodge this one, but apparently I couldn't. So I only have one poem. I don't have a website. I don't have a book. And I will apologize in advance. It's not very happy, but I think it's a hopeful one. It's called Anomaly. Listen, daughter, to the quiet. And no, it's not silence. Though the stainless steel saws are pausing midway through bone, so the call is heard, a cow to a calf 1,500 miles away. Time enough for the metal to glint as reflection in her soft eyes, they will yet quarter when the coughing foreman hits that button again. No, this quiet is not silence. No matter how we hope, some can't tell the difference. Like you, daughter, who told me about the horse queen you dreamt of 6 weeks into quarantine, who cares for cows and chickens and horsies and protects them from the virus, as I would protect you by giving you illusions and aphorisms to gird you for whatever comes next, and all the love I can bellow out before my own saws come for me. But every bellow ends. So listen to the quiet, daughter. In between the scraping of chalky bricks of fallen empires, underneath sandals of migrants, 1,500 miles from the flaps of nylon tents and hot desert camps, filled with more soft eyes, who've seen the sand fall between the floorboards of our thoughts and prayers, and we who can feel the tilt of the arc that we're in, the leaks we think are a mistake, naturally to be addressed by some piece of legislation or good luck, or some capricious God who dares us to try to know its mind just one more time. The anomaly is our oiled polymeric trick on ourselves, to believe this quiet is somehow against the world's plan, an accident, a departure, a hiatus from having to be creatures that can find hope somehow in this. That if the arc of history bends at all from steel saws and bellows towards justice, it is because everything eats and is eaten.
Thank you so much, Adam. We're really glad to have you join us this year. And thank you to all the poets. That was some really powerful, beautiful, heart-wrenching poetry. Really appreciate all of this. I'm going to close us out on one final poem, but before I do that, I have 3 quick thank yous. The first is to Liz Kogan and Dan Cohen for managing all these logistics. I don't know how you do a Zoom with 80 people on it, but it was done incredibly. Thank you so much. The second is to Karen Lyon, who is the mind behind all of this. And with her section in the Hill Rag, the Literary Hill and the Poetic Hill, she's given a platform to so many emerging DC writers and poets. A lot of us owe a great deal to her, including myself. So I really want to thank Karen. And the third person I want to thank is Paris Singer Russell. If Karen is the mind, then Paris is the heart behind all of this. She brings us together every year, and we thank her so much for that. So this last poem I wanted to close on is actually the poem I close on every year at the Poets Corner. It's kind of a similar theme to Naomi's poem, and I wrote this when I first moved to DC. It was just sort of a fun poem, but this year it takes on a different meaning. It's basically about staying at home, and in this case, sitting on a porch and waiting for a storm to pass. And I feel like that's kind of an apt metaphor for what many of us who aren't on the front lines, what many of us are going through. So this poem is called Fireflies, and it's from my chapbook, Babylon. Nursing beer and troubles on my porch, with this corncob packed and lit, when a rumble of thunder in the southern summer gives my thoughts a short respite. Rain drips from the eaves to the floor, where it leaves soft patters like tapping fingers. Breeze picks up, snuffs my match. Now in darkness, I watch eerie lights start to circle and linger. Green will-o'-the-wisps, why'd you come out tonight to flirt beneath such stormy skies? If you still pursue love, flouting death from above, then no complaints have I. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Jonathan. Beautiful.
Thanks so much. Bye, everyone. I guess that's it.
Well, we have some remarks. We're going to wrap up. Tim and I are going to wrap up. Thank you very much.
Thanks, poets.
Tim, are you there? Is Tim there? Okay. We
It's
have,
better if I.
there you are, my friend.
Yes, it works better if I take myself off mute. That helps a lot. So.
So I have some unfortunate news. My mom switched computers, couldn't log on, dropped off, and started watching Cuomo.
Yeah, are you sure this is just a polite way of saying I want to go back to Cuomo? Is that?
I don't know. My sister's texting me, "You lost mom to Cuomo." So what can we do?
Yeah.
We had her for a while. Anyway.
Has she not heard of separate tabs? What's going on here?
I don't know. Anyway, what we're going to do now, because as I mentioned before, we had this one little snafu where we did not let our exhibitor 826 talk about the program. We had promised them a little spot. We messed up. We're going to give them another shout out. This is 826 DC. And we are going to show their website, their beautiful website, and we're going to let their website speak for itself.
Can you see it?
Yep.
You can see it. They've got all kinds of things for kids. Really great program. It's the DC affiliate of the National 826 DC that Dave Eggers launched, I think in California. So check them out. They're terrific. And it would have been better if we had given Kelsey her time to talk, but we're trying to make up for it a little bit. Oh, and there's our website. Hey there. Well, you can, so I guess this is a good time to mention that you saw some pretty amazing authors today. You got to hear from them. You got to hear how thoughtful they are, how brilliant they are. And I want to make sure to give a shout out to all of the other authors who contributed to this event, who we could not fit into our tight 2-hour time slot. But they're still terrific. You can enjoy their work. It is truly a smorgasbord. There's everything from poetry to children's books to history to historical nonfiction. It's just every genre. Fantasy, there's Emily's video, just everything. So it will give you a nice, at least half day of entertainment. Thanks for showing that, Dan. Oh, we're going, are we, yep, is that, oh, great.
Me and, oh, there you are. All right, there we are.
So we want to just express our sincerest thanks to all of the authors who brought their A game to this year's first ever Literary Hill BookFest. We want to give a shout out to Tamar Abrams, who raised our PR game to new heights. Our longtime stalwart supporter, Tom Faison Real Estate in DC. To our official bookseller, East City Bookshop, who we hear is doing well and selling loads of books even during the quarantine. And finally, to the two people who made this event a reality, an actual physical event for years, Karen Lyon and Ed McManus, the founders of the Literary Hill BookFest. Yes. I hope they're still watching, even if my mother isn't. If without them, we wouldn't be here and you wouldn't be here. It is really their brainchild. We hope that you enjoyed today's event. Be sure, as we mentioned, be sure to check out our website. The event has been recorded, so it'll be available on our website in case you missed it. Tim, do you have anything?
No, and thank you, Liz, for all that you've done to put this together. So we really appreciate all that. You put an amazing amount of work in there. Usually at this point at the Literary Fest, me and Ed are unloading things from a U-Haul and shoving it into his basement right now. So I will say the cleanup will be a little bit easier this year around. So, but hopefully we'll be back and doing it in person next year.
Oh, we should give a shout out to the Marines.
Oh yes, yeah. We didn't need the Marines. Normally the Marines from 8th and I come and help us out and provide a lot of the cheerful labor to get it all set up and to take it back down. They make a lot of work go really quickly. So we'll be calling you guys next year.
Absolutely. So stay home, stay safe, everybody. Stay with us and wash your hands.
Yeah, a couple times. Yeah. Thanks.